Ben Sebastian here. Okay, so this is the first time I've done this, so it's probably going to be a bit haphazard. But you're probably wondering, why am I standing here? Why am I wearing this dodgy vest? Well, there's a story behind that, and I'll tell you that in a second. But the main point of this video today is to kind of walk through the concept, certainly the lyrics behind my release, Banged Up. As you will have read, it's based on my experiences as a prisoner in a Victorian style, old-fashioned type prison here in the UK. I went in for a fraud by abusive position, attached to offence, attached to cocaine addiction and stuff. So that was in 2020. I was inside for 15 and a half months. At sentencing, at court, you basically go down in the dock and put in a van in a small sort of holding compartment, and I was taken to, I won't name the place, but I was taken to this Victorian establishment, and all of the kind of references in the lyrics, they all have some relation to kind of true, real, lived experience. So join me as we kind of get cracking with this. I was sentenced at around 4-ish in the afternoon, something like this, and kind of you're in a holding cell underneath the courts, and you're gone into the van that I spoke about earlier, and then it was a long drive to the prison. Probably arrived there 9:30 at night. This was at least sort of just past the middle of December, and sort of cold, dark, wet, as I recall. You go through all of these gates and then gates and more gates, and you step out of the van and you're taken to reception, and then you're kind of sort of like booked, processed, strip searched, all of that kind of stuff, and then you're sort of taken to the wing, and it was 11 at night, and I remember kind of walking along the wing. It's sort of dead quiet because all the prisoners are inside their cells and what have you, and just seeing this Victorian sort of just expanse, and it just looked so dingy and dilapidated and just formidable, and it was just such an unreal experience. So 11 at night, I crossed the wing. That's exactly what I did. A cold, unsympathetic grin. To be fair, this guy was actually all right, but certainly on the way in, sort of passing other guards, so it's like, yeah, just another guy, no sort of interaction. Bag of basic provisions. Okay, so I didn't take in personal possessions with me to court. It was expected that I would go down, as they say, but yeah, so I had nothing sort of personal, and the basic provisions kind of references, you get something every day. You get it when you arrive. It's called a tea pack. It's essentially a little polythene bag, see-through. It's got about 6 tea bags in it, 6 little sachets of sugar, and a little kind of sort of mini cereal, and yeah, not much else. A few whiteners, so in sachets. You have your bedding kit, which is like this orange sort of maize blanket, green torn kind of bed sheet and pillowcase, and you have a cheap toothbrush and like a cheap shaving foam and a tube of toothpaste and a bar of soap. It's just basic stuff. So that's just kind of what you get. All I owned, that's all I owned as I stepped in, that was me. That was all my possessions, and of course regret over your decisions or over my decisions. Like, what the hell? How did I end up here? Is this really happening? A lot of self kind of incrimination going on, as you would hopefully naturally expect. All my days, what a Victorian malaise, a sarcophagus of nothing in which to spend my days. Literally, this cell I walked into was, I don't know, 8 feet wide, kind of tall, arched. It was grey, it was bleak painting, tiny little kind of window, rickety kind of double cot type of bunk bed, furniture that is so basic you wouldn't even find anything like it in IKEA or anything like this, you know, and the furniture in there had been kicked to shit. You know, the doors were a long distant memory of what was left of this bare furniture. And you know, in this cell I am bound. You're actually, you know, you're going to be stuck there for a long time. Certainly that's the perception. And cry, eat, yes, you know, that happened. Eat, that's where you eat. There's no sort of real dining hall in these type of establishments. And shit and sleep, you know, the toilet is literally a couple of feet from the bed, if that, you know, and sleep, that's where you're going to be kind of resting your head, you know. Let's carry on. Okay, so if you're fucking lucky, you might get to walk around the yard. We had this little concrete yard, but as I say, it was in the middle of COVID, and like literally right at the sort of peak of it, and society and government as a whole hadn't really worked things out, and the prison service is perhaps, you know, 8 to 10 steps behind, probably even more than that, any kind of regime in the UK. And they really hadn't figured it out. So if you were lucky to get round the yard, basically refers to the regime that was in force. It was for every 2 days you got out of your cell for 30 minutes, and that was either to walk around the yard for 30 minutes or have a shower. And that was if you were lucky. And by that meaning if there was enough staffing levels, if there was enough interest from the guards to actually do that. And if something hadn't gone on in the wing that, such as, you know, someone hanging themselves, or violence, or something that kind of meant that wing was going to be locked down for some reason for the rest of the day. And getting the letter from your family, well, I've had no family for a very long time, but letters that friends and associates of mine have kind of sent, it's kind of hit or miss whether you get them in the prison service. Again, it's down to delay, whether they've just decided to throw it in the bin, whether it's been delivered to the cell correctly. You know, I shit you not. It's it can be very random. It's either very efficient, the stuff you get sent in prison, like mail, letters, items, books, or things that you've kind of ordered from a catalogue once you've kind of been in the system for a bit. It can be just all very sort of like hit and miss, and no one giving a fuck about you. Well, you know, you are just essentially, there's two types of prison kind of guards. You know, there's those that are trying to be nurturing, but eventually, you know, the system beats them down and they really don't give a fuck about you or your problems. You know, you can say, look, I'm trying to sort of do this, do that, try and get in contact with this, what's the process for this, and a lot of them are, you know, either very helpful or very disinterested, and even the helpful ones become disinterested because they just get bombarded by requests from prisoners all the time, and the shit that they see and go through. It's got to have a mental toll of some nature. And you also find out who your real friends are when you're sent to prison, you know. It's yeah, it's interesting. It's not interesting, it's fucking awful. But I can tell you that all the ones that said, yeah, we'll be in touch and stuff, never happened. And all the ones that were quiet actually came through. So it's, you kind of, once you're out of society and into a system like that, you're very easily forgotten. You know, the world is a busy place, of course, and people's lives are busy, but you know, there's nowhere where you're completely off the radar as prison. You won't get all your teeth kicked in. Okay, violence isn't that common. Well, it's actually very common in prison, but it's very easily kind of avoided by just keeping yourself to yourself and not doing idiotic things like, you know, racking up debt for vapes, drugs and other sort of contraband and things like this, and not getting involved in the wrong circles, if there are indeed right circles in such a place. But I saw some things kick off quite a number of times, both between prisoners and guards, but mostly prisoners and on prisoners. But you live there with a sense. You live there with a sense of trepidation all the time, and you're always kind of watching your back. You're always watching your cell door, unless you're in a sort of a newer establishment where you can have keys to your own sort of cell that you share with your cellmate. But yes, there's always an air that you're in an environment where something could be aimed at you. It could be just gossip that's kind of gone, that's been created out of nothing, and you're going to be at the sharp end of it. I've seen that as well. So yeah, there is an element to luck. I wanted to reference that in the song. And getting jugged out on the landing. So jugging is a process where you have a kettle and you boil that with water, and then you add sugar to it, and you basically pour that over someone. And this will usually happen to sort of deadheads, people, you know, owing lots of money for drugs, contraband, this kind of stuff, or just someone that's just not liked. And I've seen a couple of incidences of this, and yeah, it happens on the landing because that's when everyone's out of their cells and it's association time, or soch, as it's kind of called these days. And you're only being a number in prison. As soon as you're there, you're giving a number. It's actually a mixture of letters and numbers. Be a letter, 4 numbers, and 2 more letters. But yeah, everything you reference, every form you fill out, everything you do is kind of has to contain this number, and you're very much aware of it. So yes, so the deranged first cellmate, you know, no names obviously, but this guy was from a sort of travelling community, and he was there because allegedly, probably quite factually, he did actually put his wife through a window and all sorts of kind of stuff, and I guess he was coming off a lot of substances and wasn't the type to conform to the regime easily, and he had a very short fuse. And I remember, because he managed to get, you know, a pin on the phone that we had in cells, and he'd be phoning them up, and he'd be like, one minute he'd be like, oh yeah, I love you, let's just call her Tracy. Yeah, like, oh, I love you, Tracy. Like, oh, la 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 la. I know I said I'd change and all that. I'm really sorry. And then 5 minutes later, be like, you need to phone the fucking brief solicitor. Oh, well, oh, fucking this, you made me fucking do it. You know what you can fucking get, like, you fucking. And then when she'd obviously back off, he'd just fucking throw the phone down and grab the TV, throw the food, throw at me, and he'd just get wind himself up and be looking at me, and in his head he was seeing her, so he would call me like Tracy Surveillance and starting at me and be like, you fucking this, you fucking that, you fucking this, and all this. And I was just like, and it was just escalate. Eventually it would burn out. And then he'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, mate, give us a hug and all this kind of stuff. And he'd just like, oh, fuck. Yeah, let's continue. So one night, when one of these episodes was occurring, you actually have in your cells, on the wall, you have a cell bell, and it's a push button thing, and basically a light will go off on the landing outside your cell, and then probably in the guard's office or whatever. So late at night he was kicking off, it was getting violent. Now obviously hitting the cell bell is not a great idea, because the guard's going to come, and you know, by that time you probably made the situation worse. That's why it's a grave risk, because he's seen you do it, and he was like, if you fucking hit that fucking bell, but yeah, and all this kind of stuff. But because it had got quite violent, and there was not really any signs showing of a bait, and I was just like, you know, fuck it, boom. And it did kind of worsen, and 4 hours did pass, until sort of the guard opened sort of flap, and kind of looked through a little rectangular window, by which time he'd chilled out and we'd made up and he'd gone back to sleep. You know, complete apathy and laziness from the night team, and that's just so typical of prison, and it has dark and macabre consequences. If you read any prison press, and there's a number of kind of newspapers, Inside Times being probably the most famous one. You can look at reviews of prisons, and you can see follow-ups on reports made by coroners, people who have died in the establishment, and things like this. And you know, there's frequent reports where the cell checks weren't done correctly, bells were pushed, and no responses were made, and the prison service get away with it time after time. And then back in this cell, I am bound to bruise, eat, shit, and bleed. You know, it's in a bit of a sorry state, and again, just using that to kind of continue the rhyming sequence. You won't be inclined to hang yourself, so I guess a lot of prisoners have feelings towards kind of taking the suicidal sort of way out. It's a very despairing environment and predicament to be in, and it does feel very hopeless, particularly at the beginning. Swinging from the light fittings, it refers to one incident and one observation in the Victorian cell that I was in. You won't find this in newer establishments because there's no wiring, there's no loose pipes, there's no light fittings. It's all very kind of securely moulded, so prisoners can't hang themselves from anything. But in the cell I was in, you could actually see where bed sheets had been tied into nooses, and they've been cut down. I don't know if you're familiar with those razor blades that are sort of plastic, and then they have the kind of curved bit, the sort of diagonal razor like this. You can see incidences of, you know, where they've cut someone down, and they just leave the remnants up there. Quite morbid. And then the second instance was there's this lad that he'd been in and out frequently. He was a frequent flyer, and we'd walk around the yard again every 2 days, and you know, I didn't talk to anyone, but I managed to strike up conversations with him, and it was over sort of New Year's Eve. It was the 2nd of January, and we'd been on like intensive lockdown just because the COVID, you know, extra bang up time inside your cell, not enough staff, and then of course the holiday period made for not enough staffing even more of an issue, and the 12 hours past relates to this as well, because at like, I think it's more than 12 hours actually, so I think it was about 7 at night, he was in the cell a few cells down, and he pushed his bell, and in this establishment he pushed the bell, it made this beep beep sort of noise, and I remember hearing it, and couldn't identify which cell it was. It's later I knew it was his, and this went on, and at 10 o'clock it was still going, no attendance from the night team, and then I remember going to sleep, and I remember waking up at about 3, I remember waking up at about 5, and it was still going, and it was still going at sort of 7 or 8 when I was proper up, and then by about 9:30 suddenly there's all this commotion on the wing, you know, not because they've opened up and let prisoners out, that wasn't happening, but it was, you know, prison officers, and yeah, they found him, he basically hung himself. So all it would have taken would have been someone to attend that bell and maybe have a conversation with him, or for the regime to not be as tight as it was. But yeah, he lost his life that night, and that's referenced in the song as a grim sort of experience. Sad. So yeah, it will take them 12 hours to find you. Yeah, so a lot of time for self-reflection. There's a lot of looking out the very small window that you have, and of course it being darker a lot over the winter when I was there. There's a lot of looking out at the moon, and you're so far away, no one's going to come visit you, not that it was permissible anyway because of COVID. That actually happened. A pigeon managed to come through into the window, and it buzzed around the cell, and it had shat on my plate. I'd eaten my food. The plate's there, by the way. Actually, you get those in your kind of bag of basic provisions. They're sort of like blue or grey sort of plastic affairs, very basic. And you get like a little cup and plastic fork, knife, spoon. But yes, this pigeon come in and he shut on the plate, and yeah, for some reason in this cell, just the flies sort of congregated. I used to clean the cell with what we had, and you can get sort of basic washing up liquid, and like detergent, but it is just so weak because, you know, people who are into substances and kind of ex-alcoholics will find a way to get high off anything, so this stuff is just, it's next to useless. But you know, these corners were just rotten in the cell, and yeah, the flies were a regular kind of guest. Well, yes, it's obviously quite desolate atmosphere, dark and horrible. Dreams of outside as I meditate, literally whenever you're sort of meditating or even sort of sleeping or daydreaming, you know, the visions you have of your kind of past events, there's things that you remember that you just haven't thought of, that haven't come to mind for ages, and dreams and lucid daydreaming that you have is just hyper realistic, probably because what you've got is, and what your existence is mundane, bleak and just colourless. So obviously the mind seeks to entertain itself, but perhaps, or to fill in the void. Yes, that's something I remember. I have quite vivid dreams. I have a vivid imagination, but nothing has ever kind of been as vivid as the dreams that I had whilst in prison. Yeah, so you wake, you have a piss, and then for the better of a part you're sat there in a vegetative state. It really is like that. It's really as dull and interesting as that most of the time. And that's without COVID regime, because obviously it ended at some point, and obviously I moved to a different establishment. But that was much better. But yeah, it is exactly what it says here on the tin. Again, your failings, you get plenty of time to think about them. Furthermore, you also get something called a sentence plan by your sort of offender manager. So you've got that to kind of complete and work through as well. You know, sort of talk about how you got into the situation that led you to commit the offence you committed, and all this kind of stuff, and kind of how you're going to sort of manage stuff in the future. For some prisoners, that process is kind of a lot more wholesome. For me, it was a case of kind of a few sessions, one-to-ones, and lots of paperwork, although this happened sort of later in time. Yeah, you've only got you and your mistakes to blame for being there, and you think about them a hell of a lot. So the playing chess actually relates to an establishment I went to after this, when I certainly opened up, and yeah, you sort of chess is a big thing in prisons, and it gets bigger and bigger even as, you know, the game ages, and you'd think less people be interested in it, but if you can get hold of a chessboard, well, that is such a solid way of passing sort of time. But you meet some fantastic chess players in prison. You really, really, really do. And you do sit there and go, so who am I playing chess with? I mean, you're rubbing shoulders with all sorts of offenders, or people that have kind of let themselves into prison, I suppose, through all sorts of acts, from simple and silly and stupid to downright horrific and ugly. And, you know, occasionally there's been circumstances where you're sort of, you know, playing chess with someone, another prisoner will just be looking at you like, you know, and you'll speak to them later and you're like, you know what this chavvy's in for, you know, and I sort of tell you, and of course you don't really know if this is true or not, because a lot of things get conflagrated and what have you in prison. You never really truly know anyone. That stuff always weighs on your mind as well. But the takeaway point of it is you know, you are speaking to, or for me, I'm speaking to people that I wouldn't normally give the time of day, and it's interesting that you can learn something from almost everyone. There's a lot of trauma in prison, and it's not just related to the offences that they've committed. you know, there's some backstories and stuff that, again, if true, but yeah, it's just horrific. But yeah, it plays on your mind who exactly you're playing games with, you know. So that kind of comes to the end of the kind of sort of walkthrough that kind of gives you some idea of kind of my sort of thoughts and interpretation of experiences behind the song. It's funny. It's been a funny experience doing this video because it's obviously I've been thinking about this to create the music, but when you're sitting there, sort of standing here, talking about it, you may have well have noticed that I'm sort of a bit of a quieter soul and don't have the energy that, you know, I'm sort of displaying sort of now. I guess stuff like this sits with you, and so should it, I suppose, as an ex-prisoner. Yeah, I just put it to music. It came to my head. I was writing a sort of riff, and then this whole sort of banged up kind of thing cycled around in my head, and then I got a verse down like very quickly. I think it was the chorus actually. The chorus came first, and if you're fucking lucky, and it was just like, yeah, this is the moment I get to address it. But addressing it through music and discussing it as an individual, like this, two very different experiences. So yeah, you get to see a different side of me, I suppose. And as for the vest, this is an actual prison issue vest, and I managed to get it out of an open prison. So basically, when you're sentenced, you go to sort of a general CCAT kind of remand sort of holding prison. Then you're then filtered out to different establishments, different types of establishments, depending on your level of risk and the type of offence and such forth. And I worked my way to decategorisation, which was basically the next along. I went to an open prison, which is like living on a sort of university campus, just with fences and guards. But it was much nicer. Yes, so this vest came along with me from the said first prison, and you are realistically sometimes, you know, you never say never. You're only one change of clothes away from being somewhere like that. It's a useful reminder, perhaps, or maybe I just can't let go of my experiences. That's how I always have to have something. Who knows? That's been me, looking stupid, feeling awkward, talking about Banged Up. I kind of hope you enjoyed the video.